There are monsters that don't wear masks or hide in the dark. Sometimes they sit across from you at breakfast, wear a kind smile, and carry your last name. My name is Margaret Elaine Whitford, but most people here just call me Grandma Maggie. I'm 79 now, and for nearly 70 years I've lived with something no child should have to carry. I grew up in a place where secrets were as thick as the summer heat. A small farming town in southern Alabama, the kind where neighbors wave from porches and everyone's business is whispered in church parking lots. The kind of place that values family above all, sometimes to a fault. This story isn't easy for me to tell, but I've come to believe that silence is a kind of second death. If you're listening today, I hope you'll like this video and subscribe to this channel. Share where you're watching from in the comments. You never know who else might need to hear this. I was 10 years old when my life split in two, the time before Mama passed and everything after. Our home was a modest one-story house, painted a faded white with a wraparound porch. Mama kept yellow tulips in clay pots on the windowsills. Daddy, Thomas Whitford, worked from sunup to sundown in the peanut fields. Mama, Joyce, ran our household like a clock. She baked, she prayed, and she made being poor feel like being rich in love. I had two younger siblings, Samuel, who was 8, and Clara, just 4. I was the oldest, the helper, the little second in command. That spring of 1958, our days were filled with muddy creek splashes, cornbread lunches, and stories under quilts at night. Until the morning Mama didn't get out of bed. Her cough had been bad for days, but she always said it would pass. That morning, I walked into her room and saw a shade of blue around her lips that haunts me to this day. "Mama," I whispered. She tried to smile, but the effort took everything from her. "Just the chills, baby. Go get your daddy." He didn't hesitate. Wrapped her up in quilts, carried her to the truck, and headed for the hospital in Everett, the closest town with more than a clinic. "You stay with the little ones," he told me. "Grandpa Will's here. He'll look after y'all." That was the first day I hated our house. My grandfather, William Whitford, had moved in with us after Granny died the year before. He was 67 then, big-boned and hard-eyed, with a voice like gravel and hands that never stopped smelling of tobacco. Folks in town respected him, said he was a godly man, a war hero, a man of principle. I knew him as quiet, cold, always watching. Daddy left. The rain poured all day. I played with my siblings, told stories, and made sandwiches. Grandpa sat on the porch in silence, puffing his pipe like nothing was wrong. Evening came. Then darkness. Then headlights in the mud. It was just Daddy. Alone. Soaked and silent. "She's gone," he said in a voice that wasn't his. "Pneumonia." They couldn't do anything. Grief hit like a storm that never passed. I remember crying into Daddy's chest, soaking his shirt with tears while he shook without sound. Grandpa stood nearby, dry-eyed, unmoved. That night, Daddy collapsed into their room, now half empty. I sat at the kitchen table with Grandpa. He poured a shot of whiskey and slid the glass toward me. "Take the edge off," he said. I shouldn't have taken it, but I did. It burned like fire. Then another. And another. Eventually, the world began to blur. My limbs went numb. My head spun. And then Grandpa said, "Come on now. Let's get you to bed." But he didn't take me to my room. He took me to his house. The rest I only remember in flashes. The sharp smell of whiskey. Rough fingers. My small body held down. My voice, lost somewhere I couldn't reach. And his words, still like poison in my ears. "You're the woman of this house now. The next morning, I woke up in my bed next to Clara. For a fleeting second, I thought maybe it had all been a bad dream. But the bruises said otherwise. So did the blood on my sheets. And just like that, I learned two things in one terrible night. That monsters don't come with claws. And that sometimes they live in your house and wear your blood. The funeral came. A blur of casseroles and covered tears. My siblings didn't understand. I barely did. But I knew one thing: I couldn't tell Daddy. Not yet. He was shattered. And if I shattered too, who would keep Samuel and Clara from falling apart? I took it upon myself to protect them. To cook. To clean. To smile when I wanted to scream. Grandpa's eyes followed me everywhere after that. I learned to avoid his gaze, to pretend I didn't flinch when his shadow darkened a doorway. He became more cautious, more deliberate. He waited for Daddy to be out, for my siblings to be occupied. Each time I died a little more inside. But I kept silent. Because no one would believe a little girl over a church elder. Because my daddy had just lost his wife and couldn't afford to lose faith in his own father too. Because in 1958, girls didn't speak. They endured. If you've made it this far, thank you. Please click the like button if this story moved you. And subscribe to hear what happened next. Because something did happen. One night that changed everything. And it all started with a broken plate and a raised voice. I never told Daddy. Not with words, anyway. But there are things a father feels before he understands. And mine, despite his grief, despite the silence he wore like a second skin, began to notice something wasn't right. It started with the marks on my arms. Faint bruises in the shape of fingers. I'd claim they were from hauling water buckets or bumping into the door frame. He never questioned it. Not at first. But Daddy was a man raised in truth, and truth has a way of whispering even when we try to shut it up. That spring, I kept up the routine. Wake early, feed the chickens, cook breakfast, walk Sam and Clara down to the creek path for school. I cleaned the house, tended Mama's garden, and helped Clara with her letters at night. I became my mother's ghost, haunting the corners she used to warm, copying her gestures as best I could. But I was not her, and I couldn't bake biscuits without burning the bottoms. Grandpa will kept his distance when Daddy was home. But the minute he stepped out, to town, to the field, even to the well, Grandpa would find me. Sometimes it was just a look. Other times, it was not. He would corner me in the shed, or the hallway, or behind the barn. Girl, he'd say, as though I were livestock. And after, he'd mutter the same threat with that same cigarette-stained breath. You speak, you ruin this family. You want your daddy to die of heartbreak. So I didn't speak. But I began to fight in small ways. I slept with scissors under my pillow. I nailed the door shut from the inside when Daddy was out. I stayed with the neighbors when I could, invented chores that put me in public spaces. I became good at disappearing in plain sight. But nothing I did could take away the dread that pulsed in my chest like a second heartbeat. Then one Saturday in early May, the sky turned an odd green, one of those southern storms you can feel in your bones before you ever see it. The air was heavy, swollen with something about to break. Daddy left that morning for the feed store. Sam and Clara were at a birthday party down the road. Grandpa and I were alone. I was scrubbing the kitchen floor, humming low to myself, when his boots creaked across the porch. Elaine, he barked. Get up. I need your help. I didn't answer. He stepped inside. I said, I'm not coming, I said. Hands still in the soap water, heart pounding so hard I thought it might shatter my ribs. Silence. Dead, thick silence. You forget who runs this house now? His voice was low, dangerous. I didn't look at him. I didn't forget. I just stopped caring. The next second happened fast. He crossed the floor in 3 steps and grabbed my arm. Hard. You little witch, he hissed, dragging me toward the back room. I kicked, scratched, screamed. That's when the front door slammed open. Daddy. Back early. Soaking wet from the sudden rain. Grocery bags dripped in his hands. He froze in the doorway, watching his father jerk me down the hallway like a sack of cornmeal. What the hell is going on? Grandpa dropped my arm instantly. Nothing, he muttered. Girls being disrespectful. Disobedient. Daddy looked at me. He saw my torn sleeve. The swelling bruise. The terror I couldn't hide this time. My eyes begged him. Say something. Do something. Please. What did you do to my child? He said, his voice suddenly quiet. Too quiet. The storm outside thundered like a warning. I told you. She's just mouthy, Grandpa said, voice gruff, deflecting. Getting too big for her. Daddy's fist came fast. Clean. Brutal. Grandpa stumbled back, hit the stove, then the floor. But he wasn't dead. Not yet. He rose with fury, reached for a chair, and lunged. They fought in the kitchen, the 2 men I was tied to by blood and pain. Fist against jaw. Shouts. Crashing wood. The smell of blood and rain mixing like something ancient. Then a loud crack. And silence. Grandpa lay still. His head had hit the iron stove corner. His body slumped like life had poured out of it in one final cough. Daddy backed away, stunned, panting, knuckles bleeding. I didn't move. Neither did he. He finally spoke. Go get your brother and sister. And if anyone asks, you were all asleep. Understand? I nodded. Not because I agreed, but because I couldn't think of anything else to do. I'll explain, he whispered. When you're older. I promise. The rest of that night was a blur of lanterns, sheriff's questions, whispered condolences, and covered lies. He must have slipped, Daddy said to the doctor. Whiskey and old age. Hit his head on the stove. Nobody questioned it. Small towns don't like trouble. The next morning, the kitchen floor was scrubbed clean. But something irreversible had happened. Not just a death. Not just a cover-up. A shift. In me. In Daddy. In our family. The funeral was short and sparse. No tears. Just dirt and silence. I didn't feel grief. Only a strange hollow calm. The kind that comes when you've survived a long drought and finally taste water again. That night, Daddy called me to the table. He didn't look at me like a little girl anymore. I don't know what happened between you and my father, he said softly. And I'm not asking now. I looked down. But one day, when you're ready, I want you to tell me. And whatever it is, I'll believe you. At that moment, I knew I wasn't alone anymore. And I slept without nightmares for the first time in nearly a year. But this isn't where the story ends. Because healing is not a single event. It's a lifetime. And some ghosts don't stay buried. You'd think once the monster was gone, the house would feel safer. Quieter, yes. But safe? No. Because silence doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it means nobody dares speak the truth. That kitchen, scrubbed raw until not a speck of blood remained, still held the memory of that night. Of fists flying. Of my grandfather's fall. Of my father's heavy breathing as he realized what he had done. Not out of rage, but protection. I didn't cry when they buried Grandpa. Not once. And if people noticed, they didn't say a word. After the burial, the visits stopped. At first, neighbors brought pies and casseroles, saying things like, "You've been through so much this year," or "God never gives us more than we can carry." But soon enough, folks drifted back to their lives. Crops needed tending. Babies needed changing. Nobody had time for someone else's tragedy for too long. And so it was us again. Me, Daddy, Samuel, Clara, and a house filled with echoing absence. Daddy threw himself into work. He left before sunrise, came home just before supper, and ate in silence most nights. He tried. Lord, he did. He fixed Clara's dresses, sat with Samuel while he did arithmetic, planted tomatoes in Mama's old garden patch. He kept the wheels turning, but I saw the weight in his shoulders, how it never left, how guilt haunted his eyes every time he looked at me. I never blamed him, not once. He did what had to be done, and so did I. But trauma, it doesn't leave just because the source is gone. At night, I still jumped in the shadows. I kept the scissors under my pillow. I couldn't bear to sleep with the door open. I couldn't touch whiskey, not even the smell, without my stomach churning. And there were moments when Daddy walked too heavily down the hallway or raised his voice too quickly at Samuel, when I flinched without realizing it. And he'd freeze. Ashamed. We were two people rebuilding from rubble, with no idea how to help each other. By the time summer turned to fall, I had grown leaner, quieter. My body had begun to change too, betraying me in ways I wasn't prepared for. Breasts I didn't want. Hips I tried to hide under dresses too big. Everything about me screamed woman, a word I had grown to fear. At 12, I no longer looked like a child. And people noticed. Especially Aunt Ruth, my mother's cousin, who started visiting more often. "This girl looks like she's carrying the world on her back," she said one afternoon while shelling peas. "She needs a break. She needs to be somewhere else." I froze. She was right. But the idea of leaving the only home I'd ever known, even one so full of ghosts, made my chest tighten. Still, Daddy listened. And the idea took root. Weeks passed. Then one Sunday morning, just after church, Daddy sat me down on the porch. "Your Aunt Lillian in Fairhope said you could stay with her a while," he said softly. "Just until school starts again. Get a change of air. Learn new things." I nodded. I didn't argue. Because part of me wanted to run. And part of me felt like I was abandoning Clara and Samuel. That next week, I packed my things in an old suitcase that had once belonged to Mama. Aunt Lillian was a widow in her late 50s. No kids. Lived in a tidy house with green shutters and rose bushes out front. She had a tiny dog named Mister and a piano no one played anymore. The house smelled of lemon oil and old hymn books. I thought I'd hate it, but something unexpected happened. I breathed. For the first time in months, I wasn't holding my breath waiting for something to go wrong. No eyes watching me from the shadows. No heavy silence between me and my father. Just quiet. And safety. Aunt Lillian didn't ask questions. But she noticed things. "You flinch when I close the door too hard," she said once, without judgment. "You sleep with the lamp on." I stared at her, waiting for more. But she just nodded and said, "It's all right. You don't have to talk about it until you're ready." And somehow that made all the difference. School in Fairhope was different. The building had 3 classrooms instead of 1. The teacher, Mrs. Ivy, wore lavender perfume and gave extra books to the students who asked for more. I read everything she gave me. Stories of girls who ran away, who fought dragons, who won. I devoured those pages like they were food. Books became my escape hatch. They showed me there were worlds where girls weren't prey, where strength didn't mean fists or silence, where people listened when you screamed. But healing doesn't follow a straight path. There were nights I still woke up gasping. Nights when Mr. the dog would curl beside me while I cried into the pillow. Sometimes, I'd sit on the edge of the bed and whisper, "I'm still here, Mama," just to feel like someone heard me. And sometimes I'd imagine what Mama would say if she'd lived. Would she have believed me? Would she have known? 2 months passed in Fairhope before I returned home. The house felt different. Daddy smiled more now. Clara and Samuel had grown. There was a new calm in the air. And Daddy? He hugged me longer than he ever had when I stepped off that bus. "I missed you," he said. And I knew he meant more than just my presence. That night, we sat on the porch swing. The stars were bright. The wind was warm. "You seem lighter," he said. And I realized I was. Not healed. Not yet. But no longer crushed. "I think I'm ready to talk," I whispered. And he didn't say a word. Just waited. What came next wasn't easy. I told him about the nights. The touches. The threats. About Mama's death and how that one day changed everything. He didn't cry. But he didn't breathe either. And when I was done, he stood, walked into the yard, and stared at the sky for a long time. I didn't follow. When he came back, he knelt in front of me. "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner," he said. "I failed you." "No," I said firmly. "You saved me." He shook his head. "Not soon enough." I took his hand. But in time. That moment between us, raw, imperfect, redemptive, became the cornerstone of our healing. We didn't talk about it again for a long while. But the silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was shared. And understood. If you've made it this far, thank you for holding space for my story. Please click the like button so more people can hear stories like this. And subscribe. By the time I turned 15, the nightmares had lessened, but they hadn't disappeared. Some nights I'd wake up, gasping, convinced I heard the creak of my grandfather's boots outside my door. Other nights, I'd stay awake just listening, to the wind, to the stillness, to my breath, anything to convince myself I was safe. But I wasn't the same girl anymore. Not the terrified child of 10. Not even the cautious one of 12. I had become something else entirely. Resilient. Still wounded, but awake. Still unsure, but watching. And that's when Michael Boone came into my life. He was the town's new assistant to the school custodian. Just 19, tall with dark curly hair, and hands always stained with oil or paint. He had this easy smile that made people forget how quiet he was. But it wasn't the kind of quiet that hides things. It was the kind that listens. The first time he spoke to me, I was rearranging books in the classroom during lunch break. "You always read this much?" he asked, nodding at the stack of novels beside me. I didn't look up. "Better than talking." He chuckled. "Yeah, that's true." He didn't ask more. He just started helping me alphabetize the books. Michael wasn't like the boys who whistled when you passed or tried to corner you behind the church after Sunday service. He didn't stare. He didn't push. He showed up. Sat near. Walked slowly. It made me nervous, at first. Because the worst thing about surviving abuse is learning to distinguish between attention that's safe and attention that's dangerous. Every smile had once felt like a trap. Every kindness is a test. But Michael never pressed. He'd say things like, "I'll be here if you want to talk," and then he'd mean it. That kind of patience is rare, especially in someone barely out of boyhood himself. One afternoon, the school held a cleanup event before the fall festival. Parents, teachers, and older students helped repaint the fence, sweep the halls, and mend broken chairs. Michael and I got assigned the supply room, a cluttered mess of old desks, chalk boxes, and forgotten typewriters. The air smelled of dust and varnish. He handed me a pair of gloves. "You don't like closed rooms, do you?" he asked gently. I froze. "Why would you say that?" "You always look for the window," he said. "Every time you're inside." It felt like being seen and not judged. For the first time in a long while. "I just like to know where the exit is," I said. He nodded. "Me too." That night, I stayed awake thinking about that moment. How strange it was to feel safe with someone and not immediately shrink away from it. How much harder it is to trust good than to expect harm. My scars weren't visible, but they were stitched into my every move. And slowly, Michael became someone I didn't mind sharing a little of that weight with. The first time he touched me, it wasn't a kiss or a hand on the small of my back. It was simple. He saw me walking home with a heavy basket of laundry, and without asking, he took it from my arms. Not a word, not a question, just helped. I looked at him sideways, ready for a joke, a wink, something. But he just kept walking beside me like it was the most natural thing in the world. And that's when I realized, not all men want something in return. Some just give. Weeks passed. Then came the question. "Can I walk you home from school?" he asked one day, eyes soft but direct. I hesitated. Every instinct screamed no, not because I didn't want him to, but because letting someone close had never ended well before. Still, something in me whispered, maybe this time, it's different. "Yes," I said quietly, "but just to the edge of my yard." He smiled. "Fair enough." And that's exactly what he did. For months. Never asked to come in. Never hovered. He'd walk with me, talk about nothing and everything, music, books, small-town gossip, and then wave goodbye at the fence. That winter, Daddy took notice. He wasn't a man of many words, but one evening while whittling wood on the porch, he said, "That Boone boy seems respectful." I nodded. "He is." Daddy tilted his head. "Do you trust him?" I paused. "Yes," I said, surprised at how true it felt. He nodded again and went back to carving. It was the closest thing to approval I ever got. And all I needed. Michael and I never rushed anything. We didn't even kiss until the spring I turned 16. And even then, it was gentle, more promise than passion. Afterward, I cried. Not because I was scared, but because for the first time in my life, I'd been touched by someone who didn't take anything from me. He noticed my tears, pulled back instantly, and said, "Did I hurt you?" I shook my head. "No. That's just the problem." And I finally told him. Not everything, but enough. Enough for him to understand why I sometimes shut down. Why I avoided closed spaces. Why I panicked if someone touched me too suddenly. He didn't run. He didn't pity me either. He just listened. And when I finished, he said, "You're stronger than anyone I know." Then he sat beside me on that cold wooden step until the sun dipped behind the trees, and the crickets filled the silence. That spring was the beginning of real healing. Not the quiet kind. Not the buried kind. But the kind that grows from being truly seen. I still had nightmares. Still flinched sometimes. Still struggling. But I also started to laugh again. To sing while I baked like Mama used to. To read books that didn't feel like escape, but company. If you've made it this far, thank you for holding space for me. Please like this video and share your thoughts in the comments if this story speaks to your heart. And don't forget to subscribe. I left home this summer, I turned 17. Not because I wanted to escape, it wasn't like before. This time, it was about becoming something more. I had graduated top of my class. Mrs. Dempsey, the school's principal, called me into her office one afternoon with a wide smile and an envelope in hand. "You're going to be a teacher," she said before I could even sit down. I blinked. "Ma'am, you've been awarded a full scholarship to the State Normal College in Montgomery. They only gave out 3 this year, and one of them has your name on it." I cried that night. Not because I was scared, but because for the first time, I was allowed to dream. All the years I spent buried in silence, hiding bruises and holding my siblings together, I never imagined this moment. Me, going to college, becoming a woman who could stand in front of a classroom and say, "You are safe here." Daddy drove me to Montgomery in our old truck, windows down, his hand tapping the wheel nervously. "The city's too fast for me," he muttered as we passed tall buildings and rows of strangers. "You'll be all right," he asked once we pulled up to the dormitory. I smiled. "I will now." He looked at me with the same pride I saw the night he confronted his own father. Then he hugged me hard. "Your mama would have liked this," he whispered. And just like that, I began a new chapter. College life was strange at first. I shared a room with a girl named Elaine Carter from Birmingham. She had perfume bottles lined up on the windowsill and shoes for every day of the week. Her voice was loud, her laugh even louder. But she was kind to her. She didn't pry. She noticed things quietly, like how I always faced the door when I slept, or how I avoided gym class locker rooms. One night, I found her sitting on her bed with her legs crossed, flipping through one of my notebooks. "You write like someone who's lived 1,000 lives," she said. I froze. "You shouldn't read that." "I didn't mean to snoop," she apologized. "I just felt something in your words." And then, without needing me to explain, she added, "I've got my ghosts too." From then on, we weren't just roommates. We were sisters. The campus was a new kind of freedom. Books, lectures, quiet corners in the library where I lost myself in poetry and philosophy. But even freedom comes with echoes. One day, on my way back from the grocery store, I passed an alley that reeked of old tobacco and damp wood. Suddenly, I was 10 again. Back in that house. His breath on my skin. I dropped the bag of apples and crumpled right there on the sidewalk. A woman helped me up. Asked if I needed a doctor. I shook my head. But inside, I knew. The past doesn't stay buried just because you leave the place it happened. I tried to outrun it. To fill my time with classes and volunteer work. To stay so busy I wouldn't feel the fear creeping in. But trauma is like a shadow. You don't always see it, but it's always behind you. And then, as if the universe wanted to test me, it happened. It was a crisp October morning. I'd just gotten out of a psychology lecture about generational trauma. I stopped by the bulletin board outside the cafeteria to check the announcements. That's when I heard the voice. "I heard your grandfather died in an accident." I turned, and my knees almost buckled. Nettie Crowder. She was a cousin of my grandfather's. Lived 2 counties over. I hadn't seen her since Mama's funeral. Gray bun. Pursed lips. Eyes that always looked like they were deciding who was worthy of judgment. "Didn't expect to find you here," she added, arms crossed. "I got a scholarship," I replied, forcing my voice steady. "Well, isn't that something?" she said. "He always said you were too quiet. Guess you found your tongue after he passed." I didn't answer. "You know, folks always said your daddy had a temper," she continued. "Funny how your grandpa just slipped like that." The air left my lungs. I should go, I muttered, turning away. But she wasn't done. Be careful what truths you start spreading, Margaret. Not everything needs digging back up. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the window. The calm I'd built cracked open like a splintered door. I had tried so hard to move forward, to become someone new. But Nettie's words reminded me that the world doesn't always want your healing. Sometimes it wants your silence, just like he did. I considered dropping out, running again, but I called Daddy instead. His voice came through the line, steady and warm. I didn't tell him what Nettie said. I didn't need to. I just said, I saw someone from before. It rattled me. And he replied, don't let anyone steal what you've fought to build. You earned every bit of your life. Then he paused. And if they ever speak his name again like it meant something good, you remember, he's the one that should have been ashamed. Not you. The next day, I returned to class. Not because I wasn't afraid, but because I decided fear would not be my compass anymore. I began writing again, not just in my notebook, but in journals for the college paper. Stories about silent strength, about survival in small towns, about girls who fight shadows and win. Some of the faculty took notice. One even offered me a summer internship teaching creative writing to children in underfunded schools. I accepted, because if I could help just one child feel heard before they had to carry a secret for years, then it was worth everything. Michael and I wrote letters back and forth during that time. His handwriting was neat, his words careful and warm. In one letter, he said, you don't owe your past an apology. You owe your future everything. We weren't together then. Not officially. But love, real love, it waits. And it understands. That year I learned healing isn't a finish line. It's a daily choice. To speak. To breathe. To stay. Even when the world pretends it didn't see what happened to you. Even when you're tempted to go quiet again. Because silence might keep the peace on the surface, but it drowns the soul beneath. If this part of my story touched you, I hope you'll like the video and subscribe to the channel. Let's keep walking this journey together. They say when a woman becomes a mother, she's born a second time. That was true for me. Not because of the birth itself, though that was its own kind of miracle, but because when I held that tiny, warm body against my chest, I realized something that changed everything. I was someone's protector now, and I refused to let my past become their future. Michael and I married the year after I finished college. A quiet spring wedding in the chapel where I once read scripture for Mama. He wore a navy suit. I wore a pale yellow dress and held a single white rose. No fanfare. No fuss. Just two people who had walked through fire and chose love anyway. We moved into a small cottage just outside of town. It had a porch swing, a fig tree in the back, and enough silence to finally feel safe. Our first child, Eliza, was born during the hottest summer in memory. I remember watching the wind stir the curtains while I labored, sweating and praying. When she finally arrived, red-faced and screaming, I looked into her eyes and knew, this child will never fear her home. That was my vow. To her. To myself. To God. A few years later, our son Thomas was born, named after my father. His birth was quieter, gentler, just like his spirit would become. By then, I had returned to teaching full-time. I wasn't just shaping little minds. I was watching for the ones who didn't raise their hands. The ones who flinched when someone called their name too loudly. The ones who needed someone to notice. Because I remembered what it felt like to be invisible in plain sight. My father passed away when Eliza was 10. He'd grown softer with age. Still stoic, still more of a nod and grunt man than one for long talks, but he adored my children in a way that healed something deep inside me. He built them wooden toys, told them bedtime stories that Mama used to recite. And every time he looked at Eliza, I saw the pride he carried not just for her, but for me. I did what I could, he told me one evening, sitting on my porch, watching Eliza chase fireflies. You did more than that, I whispered. You changed everything. Years passed, as they always do. Children grow. Houses settle. Scars fade, but they never vanish completely. It was a Sunday afternoon when Eliza, now 16, asked me the question I'd known would come someday. We were folding laundry. The radio was playing old gospel hymns in the background. Mom, she said, holding a shirt to her chest, why don't we talk about your side of the family? You never mention your grandfather. Or your grandma. I swallowed, carefully placed the folded towel on the pile. Somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower buzzed. Because, I said slowly, some stories are harder to tell than others. She waited, didn't push, and I realized she deserved more than silence. That night, after her brother was asleep, we sat on the porch with hot cocoa in chipped mugs, and I told her. Not everything, but enough. About Mama. About that rainy night. About the things girls shouldn't carry, and the man who had once lived in our house and called himself family. Eliza didn't cry. She didn't gasp. She just listened. And then, when I was finished, she reached over and took my hand. I wish I could go back and protect you, she said. You did, I told her. Every time she laughed freely. Every time she ran barefoot through the yard or slept soundly in her bed, she protected me from becoming bitter. I eventually told Thomas, too, years later when he was a grown man, studying social work. He was researching generational trauma for a college paper. He asked if I'd ever experienced anything that felt like a cycle breaking. I smiled. Your whole life, I told him, is proof that the cycle stopped with me. He cried. Then he asked if he could quote me in his paper. In my 60s, I began volunteering at a local women's shelter. Not as a speaker, not as a professional, just as someone who made tea, folded donated clothes, and occasionally sat beside women who weren't ready to tell their stories yet. Sometimes I just say, I understand. And sometimes that was all they needed. Now, at 79, I look out at the world I helped build, my children, my students, my grandchildren, and I no longer feel haunted by the house I grew up in. The porch that once kept secrets now holds sunflowers. The voice I once buried now tells stories. Because silence protects abusers, not survivors. And if my voice shakes as I share this, let it shake. But let it speak. So, if you're listening right now, if you're carrying something that doesn't feel safe to say aloud, know this. You are not dirty. You are not broken. And you are not alone. You don't have to tell your story today. But I hope you do someday. Because the porch can't speak for us. We have to tell the truth ourselves. If this story reached you in any way, please like this video and share it with someone who might need it. Subscribe to this channel for more real stories of survival, strength, and grace. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Because when we speak, even in whispers, the world begins to listen. God bless you. And thank you for listening to mine, Grandma Maggie.